This is Diversity and Inclusion Lesson 1 walkthrough video, plus an intro into the new model and the medium of teaching D&I on the Common Military Syllabus. I'm Captain Henry Watts at the Edwing Army Training Centre, Prowise. So I'm putting out these videos on these walkthrough videos on D&I because they are completely different to anything that we have delivered on D&I so far, and to make it as easy as possible for you to understand on how to deliver them. So there are timestamps or chapters in the description for you to jump back and forward to different parts of the video if you wish. So in this video, I'm just going to explain why the change in approach for D&I, how to access them on the Prowise, and how to run the first lesson on the new curriculum. So you'll recognize this scene. This is D&I as it's currently delivered. The instructor at the front clicking through a PowerPoint lesson with all the recruits in a hall or a cinema, pinning their ears back, no doubt trying to stay awake. It's more of a presentation or a brief, not really a lesson. So there are a few things wrong with this, which I'm sure you've identified, especially if you've delivered it. One is that they're very boring and painful to teach. You're doing all the talking, and that's usually a sign of a bad lesson, I'm afraid. Two, that means that they're highly forgettable lessons. There is no impact, and there is very little learning happening, certainly not at the level that we need to build these values and shape behavior in the recruits, which is a tough ask at the best of times, but we're not getting anywhere near what we need to in the current model. And three, it frames the topic of D&I very negatively. It's mostly about the red lines that you shouldn't cross. It's about not doing this or not doing that, which has its place, but this is a missed opportunity, and there's much more potential to frame this more positively. D&I should be a study on how teams perform, how people work together. D&I is probably the wrong name for it. It should be something like, how teams work together, or high-performing teams, or something like that. So with CMS 21, I'm inviting you to think a little bit differently about the whole concept of D&I. At the moment, it's all about inform and understand, giving the Padres number, where to go if things go wrong, etc. But there's very little engage, very little analyze, very little apply. So we're adding to these verbs with the D&I curriculum with CMS 21. So here we're engaging them with thought-provoking activities. We're getting them to analyze the situations they find themselves in, and getting them to apply it in practical situations. And this situation will culminate in D&I 3 with the incidents that happened at Deep Cut barracks in the late 90s and early 2000s. We're going to fictionalize some scenarios, but they are based on what happened at Deep Cut. And the recruits will have to work through these scenarios and try to react in the situations in real time. And that's the end point with D&I 3. So these lessons are on Prowise Presenter, and there's two ways to access Prowise Presenter. One is on the browser, which you can see in front of me on any, I'm using Google Chrome on my laptop. You can do this on your ModNet laptops, although the videos won't work, unfortunately. Or you can do it on an EduBook or any other browser, including the one on the Prowise board, or you can go through the app itself, which is on the Prowise board as well. So two ways to get in. Prowise Presenter is a bit different to PowerPoint. There's more functionality to it, as you'll see. It will mean that you will have to ask the recruits to bring their personal devices or mobiles to join something called ProConnect. That will enable them to participate in some of the activities. How do we access on the browser? I'll show you. Here's Google Chrome. I do recommend bookmarking Prowise or Presenter to make it easier, but it's pretty easy anyway. It's just a website. You go in, you put in your account details. So prowise.com, for example. Just for note, when the recruits want to join their ProConnect as well, this is how they do it. They just go prowise.com and then click on ProConnect. From the instructor point of view, you're clicking on Presenter. So this is Presenter on the browser. I recommend making your own accounts because we want to encourage you to generate your own resources on the Prowise. But for ease, I will give you the Edwings account. So you want to put in HTTP Edwing at gmail.com. Password will be, let's just put in again. Once you're in, you want to click on the folder on the bottom left, open, and school. So on the left-hand side, you'll see a number of different options. If you have just made your own account, you won't immediately have access to the school, which is the shared area of resources. So if you want access to that, let the Edwing know, we'll add you. If you go in through the Edwing account, you will immediately have access to it. So you click on school, you can see all the different ops groups on there. and you want to go on CMS 21, standard entry, diversity and inclusion. All the lessons are in here. Okay, so let's open it up and we'll begin the lesson. I'll start walking through this now. So there's two ways to navigate through the lesson. Make sure you're on the waggy finger. You see this option down here, not protractor or anything like that. And you want to go either next, or you can navigate through by clicking on the arrows here. So let's start the lesson. The first activity is to ask the recruits to define diversity. It's a loaded term. On the one hand, it's just a description of what society looks like, but it's also a political policy and an army policy. So there will be multiple interpretations. Let's discuss that. You can do this activity the old-fashioned way and just throw the question out to a class and ask them to feed in answers. What happens if you do it that way, though, is that the same people tend to put up their hand and speak, and they're usually the confident people. There is another way you could do it, which is a bit of a leveler, and let me explain. So if you open a word cloud, you want ProConnect. This is where the recruits will have to get out their phones and go on prowise.com, select ProConnect. Once they've done that, they will have to put in this number that you see here. So I'll just do that just to illustrate. 11051625. Okay, so I should be in the room, and that should show on the screen here. So yeah, participants, that's my pen name, Billy Bob. And then on my screen it says waiting for next activities to start. So that's your cue to click start over and start the word cloud. So I just feed in my responses, and all the recruits will do this. I'll just try and type quickly. Okay, and then recruits can feed in multiple answers if they want. There's one. So why is this a leveler? Well, every recruit will feed in their answers. You can just pick out one and say, well, who said this one? Okay, excellent. Do you want to explain why? And then they explain, and then you interrogate them further, and then you go, does anyone agree, disagree? And that's how you move the ball around the classroom. Then you explain what diversity is as a policy. This is to set their expectations. So you'll notice with the Prowise that it's more chunked, so there's not a lot of text on the screen, and you can sort of go at your own pace, revealing it as you go. So you reveal what it is not, and then what it is. This is just setting the expectations in terms of the Army ethos. You can do that as well with the little interlude here. This is belonging part 1. This little video, 10 seconds, you just click on it and that opens up. Not going to do it now. But also, it's really, before I reveal that, in CMS 21, we have moved this lesson much earlier in the program. And it's quite important because recruits are still forming their impressions of the Army and the Army culture. And they're still building their relationships with their peers. And the Army is just but one of the cultures to which they belong. And they will bring their own cultural connections, their own affinities to the table as well. So let's discuss what that actually means and how to interact with other people based on this background. And we'll refer to this cultural petal diagram later on in the lesson. We'll actually get the recruits to make their own. But here you click on the eye to reveal the military covenant, which we see in here. But it's good to outline that just to set the baseline. This also helps to set the baseline. This is an unfair treatment aid memoir. This will certainly be important as a handrail in the D&I 3 as we look at the scenarios and try to navigate our way through. But I do recommend putting something like this up as a poster in the lines. If you don't have this, you can get hold of it from the Edwing, just ask. And then we move to discuss why diversity is important. So you want to set this out from the perspective of task team and individual. Then we'll go on to demonstrate how this is the case. How does diversity increase collective knowledge, promote critical thinking, etc.? And the best way to do this is to illustrate it through experiences and through activities which challenge perceptions and received wisdom. So that's what we're going to do first up. This activity, I'm not going to go into detail with how to run it. The initial instructions you give to recruits are on the screen in front of you, and then additional notes you can click on the I button. So it does take the instructor having a little look, doing a bit of preparation beforehand to know how they're running it. But essentially, this is an activity which challenges perception, namely, it exposes people's subjective interpretations of timekeeping. So, the recruits will stand up and after a minute they have to they stand up, close their eyes, and after a minute they have to sit down and then open their eyes. And then those who have sat down first will look around and think maybe they've sat down too early. And conversely, those who sit down last and open their eyes to see everyone sitting down already will think that they're too late. And from an instructor, it will be interesting to see the difference in timekeeping abilities. Another example of how this plays out and different perceptions and frames of references is through this activity. So you ask the recruits just to look at this for a moment. So you can press the timekeeping thing on at the top right, and then you ask them to feed in their ideas. So here you can set ProConnect again, ask them to join the room, start the activity. If they feed in their ideas, this curtain is on screen to cover the answers, because you don't want them to see what answers other people are putting in. But essentially, the purpose of the activity is in this information icon here, and it will say that in Japan, people tend to remember the stream, the river, the background, and the context of the situation, whereas those asked in the West or in America will remember the fish. They'll remember the agents, the subjects of that situation. And both bring different frames of references and different perceptions of that situation, but it's only when you combine it that the overall picture snaps into focus. And this is essentially how diversity works. And here's an illustration of that with Bob, an intelligent person, an unintelligent team, him and the same frames of references, the same knowledge, all converging on one point. Conversely, you can have too much diversity and no way of communicating, collaborating, or working together, as you'll see here in the third one, rebels without a cause. And then the final one, the gold standard, with a lot of diversity, a lot of overlap of knowledge, and a team that can work together. So this is taken from Matthew Said's book as well. Patrolling is a really good example of how this works in practice. Each member of a patrol has a different set of eyeballs and can see different things which may be important when making decisions. It's also true that each person can contribute a different perspective and a knowledge base that they bring to the team as well. The Everest disaster of 1996 is a good example. Here, 8 climbers died trying to descend the mountain during a blizzard, and you can read more about it in Matt Said's book as well. But one member of the team here, John Krakow, was a journalist. And his account of what happened on this expedition is quite telling from the point of view from diversity and inclusion. So he says that one of the members of the team, or he was in one of the early recce team, was a junior guide, and this junior guide was a former pilot whose knowledge on cloud formations could have helped to save the expedition, but the guide didn't speak up. So the journalist account says that one of the reasons this didn't happen, perhaps, was that Rob Hall, who was the expedition leader and who unfortunately died, and he was painted as much of a hero in the film Everest, in the journalist account paints a slightly different picture, which is one where he doesn't really accept dissenting views, and he's quite an authoritarian, a dominant character in terms of his leadership style. So this perhaps accounts for why the junior guide didn't say anything, and he would have preferred to avoid confrontation and chose to remain silent rather than contribute that really important information. So in reality, there's always a danger of this rich diversity that we have and different perspectives being constrained by dominant individuals, and we can illustrate this visually through these pictures here. So if you yourself count yourself as a dominant individual, and then you will do well to remember that the team may have knowledge that you do not. So ultimately, it is a skill to work as a team, and then we need to get that message across. And these are the skills and that every individual must have to be able to do it. They must show respect, they must listen to different perspectives, be humble, etc. So we need to show these skill sets, but also try to understand a little bit about each other and our background, so that we can see that people have different frames of references and different connections that they bring to the team. So at this point, you want to revisit the cultural petal diagram, and we'll get the recruits to fill out their own. So here we want to share screen. You can do that again through ProConnect, and you want to click on here and just click share screen, send screenshots. So if there are participants in the room, that will come to them. And once they're working away, after a while, you can click retrieve results, and then you can get a number of their results up on the screen, so you can see. And this can vary depending on who you want or who's comfortable with sharing their screen or who's comfortable with talking about their background. But you can get a few people up, and they can outline the different connections, different cultural connections that they might have. So to sweep this up, you want to look at this and show that actually, although the people have different cultures, different backgrounds, different identities, there are overlaps. And it makes sure that they are aware that many of them will have developed their first impressions in a very short period of time. So you just ask them this here. So you say, what is the answer? Well, that's 7 seconds. So what's the question? And hopefully they'll know. But essentially, it's how long does it take for someone to develop a solid impression of someone? And then you can click here for more information on that. And then you want to end on this video. Just click here, which is essentially a video which outlines exactly what we're talking about here. And then look forward to next lesson, which is going to expand people's perspectives further.